Let's see, there's Marta.
Hi.
Hi, Marta.
Hi. How are you?
I'm great. We've got some of our participants already here, and I'm going to let in everybody else once we get to participants. But while we're waiting for that, why doesn't everybody just, I'll call on Beth. You can just tell her a bit about yourself, and then we'll just quick, and then we'll go to Deborah and on. So
I'm Beth Howard, and I live on a farm in Southeast Iowa, and I'm a writer, and I used to live in the American Gothic house, which is this house right here.
Wow.
Where I ran a pie stand.
Oh my gosh.
Awesome.
So cool.
That's
What kind
me.
of farm?
Great.
What kind of farm?
There's,
What kind of farm is it, Beth?
It's a family-run farm. It's over 100 years old. It's two brothers, and they farm everything: cows, pigs, corn, soybeans. Yeah, the whole
Very
thing.
cool.
They bale hay with the square bales.
Awesome.
It's been an eye-opener for me. And I have a pet goat.
and Deborah, just quickly, let's just say where you.
Sure, I'm Deborah Burns. I'm here in suburban New York on Long Island. I'm former media chief innovation officer who knows Jeannie from That World, turned author with a debut about my unconventional mother and eccentric past, Saturday's Child. And this feels like another destiny moment on a wild creative journey.
Okay.
Wow.
And Nancy?
Yes, I'm Nancy Kirkwood from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And I'm a nonfiction writer, and I teach at a women's writing group called Mad Women in the Attic. We've been around for 30 years. And I started the nonfiction section 12 years ago. And that is my heart mainly. I also work at the University of Pittsburgh for the Center for Creativity.
Fabulous. Okay, Leslie Dorman. I know Leslie from. She's been on one of our trips, and she's a fabulous writer.
And I know Jeannie from the Women's Magazine, which has begun to seem like an ancient world. And I wrote for all the women's magazines back then. I turned to writing fiction when I was 50, and I now am the assistant director of the Writers Studio, where I took workshops started by Phil Schultz, a poet, and 30 years old, and where I turned to fiction. And I have published a collection of short stories, The Best Place to Be, a novel in stories, they called it. And that's where my energy is now, teaching and continuing to write personal essays, more fiction.
Great. Yay, Leslie. And
I live in Greenwich Village, right at the Washington Arch is right out my window, Washington Square Arch.
Yay. And Trish Cook, tell us just a little bit about yourself as we.
Sure. I'm Trish Cook, and I have 6 YA novels published. I also write for Scribe Media, so I work with like kind of visionary thought leaders, and I get to pick my thought leaders. So I usually pick the very woo-woo out there stuff because that's what I love. We recently moved from like the super preppiest place in the entire world where I raised my kids, sadly, in Illinois, and we moved to Petaluma, California, which is like so hippie, so cool. I love it. And my husband moved from Wall Street to growing his hair from a crew cut past where my hair is, and he now sells worm compost to cannabis farmers.
Yeah,
it's great.
Definitely.
Okay, Sandy Fernandez.
Hi, I'm also a magazine journalist. News features was really what I did, and a lot of, or do, but do less, as we all know, focusing on, people, just ordinary people kind of doing extraordinary things. And recently, I've been trying to do more memoir. My family is Nicaraguan and we left during the war, and I left by myself when I was 9 years old. So what's been happening in this country, the last little bit has really kind of rung some bells, and that's the project that I'm working on now.
Cool. Okay, and let's see, Gail Dudley. Gail, she's written for us. I love you, Gail. I'm so glad
Love
you're
you
here.
too. So excited about today, this kickoff. But I'm Gail Dudley. I'm actually in Columbus, Ohio. A lot like what Trish just said. I just recently moved from this. Let's see, how do I want to say it? This extremely conservative suburban neighborhood to more of a fast-paced, really cool, let's do whatever we want to do area called Clintonville, Ohio. So I'm really excited about that. I have 14 books that I've written. My daughter and I published a international magazine together. And I'm always writing and serving on different blog posts and things for other women's magazines. I love the political arena. I love to write about diversity in politics and of course, being authentic after the age of 55. So I'm just happy to be with all of you amazing women.
Well, good. Well, we're happy to have you here. Trisha Stearns.
Hey, how are you? I feel a little fish out of water. I would say I'm an emerging writer. I was a real estate agent for years, single mom in a classic suburban out Atlanta area. And then when recession hit hard, I went back and got my master's in creative writing because I thought, well, I'm so used to being broke, I might as well try writing too. And then in that research, I started a farmer's market because I'm a big foodie, and it was all about, it was basically how to cook when you're broke. And I had 3 girls all going off to college and all of that. And so I ended up starting, added like 6 million to our local economy and started this whole little movement. And I built the biggest community garden there for a while. So I got to be, so all my writing has been from that perspective. And now I've retired and I'm from real estate and kind of resisting the very much like Trish Cook said and Gail said, that putting me in a box. And so now I spend more time with foxes and birds out in Alabama, where we have some property that sits on a lake. So I've been in Atlanta Journal and some literary magazines, but you know, if I was going to be compared to you all, I'm just emerging. So I'm just thrilled to be here and look forward to learning and getting to know everybody.
Okay, and
I'm a misplaced Texan. That's where my heart really is. A Dripping Springs. So
that's so funny. That's where I am. Okay, we've got 3 more people. And then we'll let everyone in. I just wanted you guys to have a chance to introduce yourself. Laura, Zam, please introduce yourself.
Sure. I'm Laura Zam. I live in Washington, D.C., and there's nothing going on here for the next 3 weeks. I'm a writer. I don't write anything about presidential elections. I write about sexual healing. And I have a memoir that came out in May, in the middle of the first peak of the pandemic. It's called The Pleasure Plan. And my memoir is about me trying to solve 6 different kinds of sex problems. I go to see 15 different kinds of healers and try 30 pleasure enhancing modalities. And I'm also a sexuality educator. I work with other people, helping them with solving their own sex problems. And I'm starting a podcast on sexual healing. That's my thing.
Good. And then Jo Beth.
Hi, yes, my cat is making a fuss here, so excuse that. But I'm Jo Beth McDaniel, and I've been a journalist since I was a teenager in college, a paid journalist. And I've done a lot of entertainment. Oh, there she is. I've done a lot of entertainment writing, so I've spent a lot of time on sets and met a lot of cool writers like Marta. It's a fascinating business. I always had an interest in it. I only knew men in the business who were my age. So I'm just fascinated by this whole program. And I really appreciate it, Marta, for giving us this opportunity. You can probably tell from my accent, I'm from the South. I'm from a tiny town in Alabama. And I have been in Los Angeles since the 80s. So, and I still go back quite a bit. In fact, I've been texting with my kindergarten boyfriend, who's supposed to be shipping me some peanuts. But a hurricane took out his dock, and I don't know. Anyway,
And
thank you.
And also in this, we have Colette Pratt. Thank you for joining us, Colette.
Hi, ladies. My name is Colette Pratt. I am a Texan by choice. I lived there for 30 years before I transplanted myself to North Carolina to be with my daughter and my grandchildren. But I'll always be a Texan. I have published an essay and a book. Go sit down. I'm babysitting my grandson. Published an urban fiction book, and I've done an essay, and I'm working on a passion project that I would love to turn into a limited television series.
And yes, and we will get to all that. So that's the, but now, Marty, you've met the 12 participants, and we now have been joined by a bunch of observers. Marta was so nice to say, why don't we let people in just so they can learn something? And Marta, I'm gonna have you, for all of you who have just come in, Marta, if, as you know, she's the co-creator of Friends and Grace and Frankie, and we interviewed her about friendship with one of her best friends earlier this year. And Marta, you were so kind to kind of say, put it out there. Oh, I missed somebody, Jennifer. Jennifer, quickly say hi. I can't count. Jennifer Hill. Oop, anyway, we'll get to Jennifer.
She's muted.
Yeah.
Oh,
Hi.
unmute yourself, Jennifer.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. I'm so sorry. My fault.
Oh, that's okay. Thank you for having
Oh,
me.
there you are. There you are.
Mhm.
So you're, and I think you're in Austin.
I am. I'm in Austin. Yes.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
we'll get to more of your story, I'm sure, over the next two sessions. But as I was saying, Marta made it, just offered to do some kind of workshop, do some kind of teaching. And we got on the phone and talked about it. And we kind of came up with this plan. So welcome, Marta, and thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I just want to start with the 12 who I met. Have any of you ever done television before, written television before?
Raise your hand if you haven't. Or
If we haven't.
If you have, raise your hand.
Nothing happened with it, but yeah.
Okay. So I want to start with, we're going to talk today a little bit about how to come up with a series and how to put it into a pitch, what a pitch would look like. And then the next time we meet, you all are going to do a short pitch to me. And I'll be able to talk to you about, if the show has legs, or what you can do to make it better, or, how you can improve your pitch. So that's the plan for these two sessions. Now, I know that a bunch of you had sent in questions. So I think what I'd like to do is start with your questions. If you have further ones, please put them in the chat. But I want to start with your questions, and I'm sure each one will take us to a new conversation.
And I thought I would start with a few that they sent in, and then we can add on. But the one I like, Nancy sent one that I thought was worth, if it works for you, Marta. She said, ask, what were the pitches for Friends and Grace and Frankie, or however you want to handle that question?
The thing about both of them, and I feel this about any show or limited series, you have to be able to boil down what your show is to what is at the heart of the show. So the important thing, the most important thing that we had to discover, say for Friends, is what's at the heart of the show. And what was at the heart of the show was it's about that time in your life when your friends are your family. That was the show. Everything else in the pitch, as far as I'm concerned, is icing and enticing and interesting, but that's what you need to know. Because if you're lucky enough to go to series, that's what you have to hold on to through the whole ride. As a matter of fact, it's the reason it was time for Friends to end was because they started having family of their own. And it was no longer that time in their life. So the show had to end. For Grace and Frankie, we not only wanted to look into female sexuality at a certain age, but really, as far as we were concerned, the show is about the idea that you can start your life over at any time. And you can continue to reinvent yourself. Now I've done a bunch of pitches that haven't gone. And I don't know that I could point to specifically what the problems were. I mean, some of them are things like, we have a show like that, or that's not part of our brand. But with both Friends and Grace and Frankie, they not only sold to multiple networks, but we got to have like a bidding war about it and where's it going to end up. And that's kind of cool. That makes you feel very special. The pitch for Friends, and I'll tell you where it came from. David Crane and I lived in New York City, and we went to college together. And we were part of a group of 6 people. We moved out here when I was, I think, 31, out to LA. And I was driving down a main street and I saw a place called Insomnia Cafe. And I thought that was a really cool idea, a place to set a series. Specifics in whatever pitch you do are very important, so that you have a taste of what the show's going to feel like, where it's going to be set, where you set it has an impact on what you're writing about. When we first pitched Friends, Chandler and Phoebe were secondary characters. And it wasn't until we started writing it that we realized that it was a complete ensemble and there were no secondary characters. But I mean, that was a change that came after we pitched it and sold it. That happened after we pitched it and sold it, before we wrote it. So things do change along the way. The other thing, the difference between Friends and Grace and Frankie in terms of the pitch was we already had Jane Fonda and Lily Tomlin. They were, and it's a funny story how that happened. It was just a fluke. I was having lunch with an executive at a studio called Skydance. She said she heard that both Jane Fonda and Lily Tomlin wanted to do TV again. I thought she meant together. Mm-hmm. So I called my agent and I said, is it true that Jane Fonda and Lily Tomlin want to do a show together? And she said, I don't know, I'll find out. And 20 minutes later, she called me back and she said, they do now.
Wow.
So we came up with a couple of ideas to pitch to them first. You know, we pitched the basic show we had. I mean, we had some differences. In the original pitch, Frankie also had an adopted Asian daughter. I mean, there were a few little differences in between the pitch and the writing, but nothing major. Yeah, and that's the pitches for them.
That's fascinating. I mean, I love I love that what you said about the details about the Insomnia Cafe, which kind of leads to one of the next questions. And I'm going to let some of you start asking, but I'll keep it going right now. But what are the elements of a good pitch? Obviously, you said it has to have a heart that keeps it going through the whole thing, and then it's fleshed out with these details, right?
So the order of things depends on what the show is. The first thing you have to do is say, that log line that is the heart of your show. So people understand who are listening what the umbrella is for everything else you're going to say. Sometimes what I do next is talk about where it's located, especially if the location is like a character in the show. New York was a character in Friends. I don't think San Diego is a character in Grace and Frankie. The beach is, but San Diego isn't. And we didn't even realize that it was going to become a character in it, but it has. It's become a real anchor for us. After, or in addition to that, you might want to start talking about the characters. Now, I want to say something about characters. If you are writing something that is based on your own life, you must write characters. It's not necessarily what you did. It's what would this character do? Because sometimes what we did was very internal and it wasn't very active and it was thinking and it was slow growth. And that's not dramatic. Dramatic is when there is conflict and there is change. And it's really nice when you talk about the characters to be able to have a real sense of them. I mean, you have to know a lot about them because people after a pitch will very often ask you questions. So you really need to know, what they keep in their pockets. You have to have a really strong sense of them. If it's a comedy, it should be littered with how they're funny. If it's not a comedy, you don't have to do that. But you have to have a sense of who these people are and why we would identify with them. That their struggles are identifiable, or the time in their life is identifiable. So it's very important that you find the characteristics, even if it's someone who isn't a good character. I mean, I always feel about villains in most shows don't have to be all one thing. They need to be as multifaceted as your main characters. So it's nice in describing the villain to be able to say, this is what we're getting to with him or her, or they. Now you have to give a sense of what the show looks like. And you can do it one of two ways. You can give samples of what stories might look like. This is a possible episode, or this is a possible episode. When this character does this thing, oh, I'm sorry, I forgot one important thing. When you create your characters, you must also create relationships between them. Are this character and this character like brother and sister? find what connects them. What is the relationship between them? Because your scenes are going to be between people and not just one character. So you need to know where you're writing from. Okay, so back to, you can either do, here's a short paragraph about what some episodes might look like, and you can give 4 examples, 5 examples. Or you can describe the pilot story. The pilot story being the first episode. If you choose to do that, then it is very important that that episode tell us what the show will be week after week. What should I expect? And another important thing that I like to add is why now? Why do this show right now? How does it speak to the human condition, the state of our world, putting a magnifying glass on people who feel marginalized? What is the reason it has to be on now? And lastly, and sometimes I do this first, why am I the writer for it? What is my connection to the material? I lived it in my 20s, or I lived a version of it, certainly wasn't quite like that. And we made up all the characters. They aren't based on us in any way. Although, you write a character, it's a little bit, it comes from you. I mean, I have elements of, Monica with, this sort of bossiness and the need for things to be a certain way. That's the Virgo in me. Anyway, that's the last piece of it is, why am I the writer for this?
Those are great. I mean, that's just so helpful. I have a question, then I'm going to start turning it over. And it may be just a naive question. So obviously you're going to write this all out, but are pitches normally done, you're speaking them in a meeting?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And then you be leaving the written, or is it?
No, here's how it goes. You go into a room, very often it's a conference type room. Sometimes you bring your agent or whatever partners you may be working on with this, or a producer you might be working with this on. And basically you talk. And it can take a half an hour, 40 minutes, depending on the, just depending on the length of your pitch and how complicated it is. Let me just say, for next week, you're all doing 5-minute pitches. So everything will have to be reduced so that we have time for everybody. But generally, I mean, these are, these can be 12-page documents sometimes. And then you start to talk. And here's the thing. Sometimes you feel like you are talking to a doorknob. They usually come in, there's the important, the most important decision-making executive, and they have their people with them, and their people are furiously writing notes. You can be telling jokes and they don't laugh, or they, do like a little corner goes up. And sometimes you feel like you're literally talking to nothing. We did a pitch once where at CBS, where the guy we were pitching to literally was falling asleep in our meeting and he was holding his eye open. while we were pitching. Needless to say, we did not sell that one. So the people you pitch, and some of them are very engaged. You can tell pretty quickly if it's going well or not, if that first paragraph grabs them. If it doesn't, you can lose them pretty quickly. And then you just have to keep going. You just have to keep going. You just have to keep going. And that can be frustrating. Sometimes you have to pitch 5 or 6 times. In these days, we've been pitching over Zoom, which is kind of a bummer because you can't really get a sense of the reaction or, you know, what kind of pants they're wearing. I mean, it's, you know, so it's a little more challenging. We just did a pitch over Zoom, and it was definitely different. It was definitely different.
Let's see. Trish, you had Trish Cook, you had a question.
So I was wondering, as a lead behind, do you need to have the pilot written as you go into these meetings, or are you really just pitching ideas?
Generally, if you have a pilot written, that's what you send.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't need to have a pilot written. You do need to have some sense of what it might be, but you don't have to have it written. Because also you may get input from the network and they say, well, all right, we love this part of it, but can we change this part of it?
Right.
And if you're feeling collaborative, you may want to do that.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And Colette Pratt, you had a question too.
Yes, I was wondering how you go about pitching a controversial topic. You know, we're living in a time right now when there is a lot of content that can be used, but you don't want to seem, or I don't want to seem militant in my pitch, but the content is very abrasive.
Man, I'd say you pitch that with pride.
Okay.
You know, I think our passion for the material is very important. I would say the thing to be careful of is abrasive is fine, but be careful of putting the executives on the defensive.
Okay.
So you're talking about your characters, these specific people. And the hope is that when you do the sort of the micro, that people see it in the macro. You know, they learn a larger lesson or are made aware of something they weren't aware of before. But you pitch it with pride. I mean, I pitched one of those and it was incredibly controversial, and I felt nervous about it because I didn't know how people would react. But I also felt, I hate to put it this way, but I felt like I had to be a big pair of balls.
Okay.
And when you say not to put them on the defensive, you don't say, you know, you've never done this before, or make them feel like they haven't, their network or whatever hasn't taken.
Well, the important thing is to not say you wouldn't understand. Because the whole point of it is to make them understand. The whole point of it is to make people who might not get it before they see your piece to open up their minds.
I see. And one question that's come up is, how do you get, what do you send to get to that first meeting? I mean, how do you, is it, you have to have an agent to get to that meeting, I guess, or what?
Here's what I would say for, let's call you green TV writers. I think that, look, if you can get an agent, yay, great, perfect, wonderful, that would really help. However, there are other ways to do it. You can find producers or production companies that are looking for material, and many of them are, and send your sample script. We had a series of meetings with young women of color so that we could hear everything they had, and at the very least start a new relationship, and at the most have a cool idea that we could go out with. So it's finding opportunities like that, people who will either listen to your pitch or read a sample. It's very important if you're coming in, and this is one time you might want to write the pilot first. If you're coming in cold and you have an idea, people are going to want to read a sample. So in that sense, writing the pilot, this would not be, in that sense, writing the pilot might be helpful, or writing a spec script or a pilot or something, so that people can have a sense of your voice.
And if you've written, like some people here who are going to pitch something based on a book, you send a summary of the book, or
I love IP. I think IP is a great place to start. And by that, caution, you have to be willing to step away from it when the story tells you to. But I think IP is great. Very often, what we'll do, we have a film based on a wonderful book, and if you haven't read it, please go read. We are all completely beside ourselves. So we have a film based on that. Our feeling was the book was so good, a simple read, but not easy, very emotional, that we had to figure out what the film was and not send them the book. Because we didn't want them to go, oh my God, what a fantastic book. I don't know how you do this. We wanted to show them how you do it. And then sometimes the book helps. Sometimes the book helps to send it to them, to have them, we have had times where people have sent us books that they've written and a short pitch that goes along with it, explaining what the show is. And that was a way to get a foot in the door and talk to people about your ideas.
Okay, that's helpful. Let's see, Leslie, I think you had a question next.
Yeah, I'm wondering, is it a complete no-no?
Wait, I can't see who's talking. Raise your hand.
Yeah, Leslie.
There you are. Okay.
Hi.
Hi.
Is it taboo to mention, for example, the structure of your show by comparing it to the structure of an existing successful show?
Comps are fine. You can say the characters are quirky, like they are on Pick Your Show, that they're quirky like, or that it has heart, like such and such a show, or it has the mood of such and such a show or movie. I wouldn't compare it structurally, because what you want to be doing is making sure that your show is unique.
Right.
So it's a fine line. It's a fine line. One thing I wouldn't do is say the main character or the male lead, think Kyle Chandler. Don't do that. That limits their thinking.
Thank you.
And I assume that if it limits their thinking, but it also it might be a little bit of a lazy way, instead of developing your character with what they have in their pockets and all that. It's a little too convenient or quick.
That's right. I mean, sometimes we just did a pitch, and we pitch to an actress to try to attach her before we go out and pitch it to networks and streaming services, which is, then we walk in with someone and they can see who she is, but the character had already been created. And the thing you should know about that when you're working, and this is true for anything, you write a character, and then an actor or actress comes in and breathes new life into it. The actor will have an impact on the character based on not only their skills, but the chemistry and the things that come through and the things that you did by accident and realize they're really good at, so you want to do more of it. So that's just another way to think about it.
That's good. Gail, Dudley, you had a question?
Yes. Could you tell me if every pitch have to have some sort of tension in it? Because lately I've been watching different series and there seems to be a lot of tension. Is that the norm?
No, it's not. And look, if you're doing a show where it's a thriller or it's a mystery or there's supposed to be that kind of tension in it, then yes, there should be tension in that. And let me say to all of you, when you pitch it, you have to act it. You don't just read it. If something is building, you have to have your voice build. I mean, you have to perform your pitch. So no, it doesn't have to have tension. It has to have conflict.
Gotcha.
All drama comes from characters who are in conflict with each other.
Gotcha. Thank you.
And comedy.
And comedy.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And Jennifer Hill, Robinault, sorry, you had a question.
Yeah, thank you. I was interested in knowing a little bit about some of the recent pitches that you've done. Are you finding that people are looking for certain types of stories, or is pretty much anything fair game right now?
There are so many outlets, and each one of them has their own brand. I don't pitch thinking, oh, this is where the show belongs, because they can change their minds about what they're doing any minute of the day, but they all try to brand themselves. So we just come up with a show that we'd like, that we would like to watch, and then figure out where might it go. Is it a network show? Is it a streaming show? Now, because some of them have rules, we just pitched a show that was based on a book called The Dreamers, which we actually wrote we pitched last December, which happens to be about a pandemic.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. That starts in a small college town and causes people to sleep. And it's really about what happens in their dreams. They were very excited about it. The script came out really well. They loved the script, but the person in charge decided they don't want to do any more serialized drama, only episodic. We have another show that's a half-hour horror murder comedy. It's a horror mystery comedy. And we came up with the show and pitched it. We have a deal with Touchstone TV, which is part of the Disney group. Came up with the show first and then spoke to them about, okay, where do we want to go with this? Who is this perfect for? And then we'll choose places based on that.
And Marta, can I ask, so you, when you say we, you mean you and your, because you have a production company.
I have a production company. That particular half hour, I'm writing with Gideon Raff, who is the guy who created Homeland. The Israeli guy who created the original Homeland and then ran this one for quite a few years. So we're doing it together, which, and also I have a production company with a producing partner. Our VP is, here's a nice story. My daughter is our VP. We wrote the We Are All Completely Beside Ourselves script together. We wrote the Dreamers script together. It's been so much fun. I feel very lucky about that. And then we have a development executive who does all of the developing work and, reads all the scripts that are coming in and decides, which ones we need to discuss and which ones aren't going to fit into what we're looking to do. So that's our company. So when I say we, and because I know I see you all, we're all sitting in our own little boxes, but television ultimately is very collaborative. Very collaborative. I always say I will take an idea from anyone because we're all, it is my vision, but I may be missing stuff and somebody else may have the way in.
So this is good news, because what you're going to hear from these women that we selected, that there might be a germ of something to develop. I mean, you might find something, which is all very good for all of us to hear. So Beth, you had a question also about pitching.
Oh, it was about the visuals. How important are visual aids in a pitch? And how many is too many, or just maybe some examples?
It depends. In all the pitches I've done until the pandemic, there was only one where I used a visual aid. I was pitching, believe it or not, The Time Traveler's Wife as a series. And in order to show how much scope the show had, I did a timeline of all the different events. And I unfolded it and unfolded it and unfolded it and unfolded it. And we had to give it to someone else to keep unfolding. And here was this giant timeline, which, basically was a tool to get them to understand this show has legs and scope and range. When I had a very strange experience, and this is not common at all, but we saw a documentary called Racing Dreams, which is about, believe it or not, it's a coming of age story set in the backdrop of competitive go-kart racing. These are 12-year-olds going 80 miles an hour. They're not screwing around. I mean, they are athletes, these kids. And we brought it up to our team at Touchstone, just sort of, we had this idea that we wanted, based on this documentary. And they watched the documentary, and the next thing we knew, we sold it. We never even pitched it. I had no idea who the characters were. I didn't get to do any of the development that I usually do, figuring out what the relations are and who are the characters and what could this, I mean, we started from a blank slate, and it has made it very challenging. So I didn't even use words for that one. This other one that we pitched, this half-hour horror comedy mystery, we did use visual aids, photos mainly, for two reasons. One was because we're setting it in the San Juan Islands for a very specific reason and a very specific mood. So we wanted pictures that this is the mood of the islands. This is the feel of the islands. But we also, because it's a horror comedy mystery, and that's not something that's terribly familiar, we wanted to give some images of what the horror could be, what the color palette is, so that it could be funny but still scary. So we felt we needed to help it a little bit. So we did use them, but you know, if they help, if it's for a really strong reason, just to show pictures isn't necessarily, oh, we have a show about, based on a true story about drag queen nuns. They are a real order. They are the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence. They are not acknowledged by the church, but what they do is good work. They just go out and do really good work. That was based on a short documentary, and we did use photos just so you could see. I mean, you can't really imagine what a drag queen nun would look like. You know, the habit over assless chaps is something you got to see.
I'm going to ask you a question that, in case other people are thinking the same. One is, for what's the difference? You made a distinction between serialization and episodic, and I'm sorry, I don't.
Okay, very easy. Yeah, thank you for asking that. Thank you. I'll clarify that. So episodic is, for example, a procedural show, a law show, a cop show, something where you're solving something in one episode. Serialization is, even though the episode may have the feeling of a beginning, a middle, and an end, there is a large ongoing story.
Okay.
So that you can't watch the second episode without having seen the first, or get, you know, a refresher course on it. Lost was serialized. This Is Us is serialized. I'm trying to think of some more. You know, Law and Order is procedural. How to Get Away with Murder is procedural.
Right, I get, okay.
A lot of medical shows are procedural also.
And so how do you, also, I guess this just depends on the legs, whether it's a limited series or a ongoing, you know, if it's going to be like a mini series, or depends on the legs.
It really depends on the idea, and whether the idea, yes, not only has legs, but has story, that the story engine is there. A limited series is very often something where you know the beginning, the middle, and the end of the show. You know exactly where it stops. And with a television series, you don't know where it stops. You think you do, you're going in a certain direction, but you don't really know until you get inside the show, and then it begins to tell you where it wants to go.
Because we had Pam Redmond, who's did Younger. We talked to her, and she, you know, she wrote the book, and it was, I guess, in the first season of Younger, they covered what was in the book, and then it just, like you say, it took on its own story.
Yeah. You know, the other thing, let me just caution you about, limited series is tough without IP.
Okay. And by IP, you mean like a source of
intellectual property, yes. That you have a book or something that will grab people's attention, or you have an actor or an actress attached to it. It's very tough to do limited series original limited series, it's hard. It's got to be a story like that people are aware of, or you have an actor who everybody wants to watch. It's more challenging.
And Trish Cook, you had a kind of related to sort of this and the differences about scripts.
Oh yeah, so I was asking, I've written screenplays, but I've never written TV scripts. And there's like very specific beats on pages within the screenplays. And I'm wondering if TV corresponds to that per episode or are there?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
I'm wondering if when you are writing the episodes, are there specific points that you have to hit by, say, specific timeframes within the show?
It depends. If you're writing a pilot, just, to write your pilot, I wouldn't worry about it. Once, if you get it attached to a network, they will then come to you and say, okay, this 1 hour show has to have a cold open, 4 act breaks, and a tag.
That's what I was looking for.
And that each one has to be not exactly this long, but close to this long. And this one should be longer than this one. Some of the networks have those very specifically. Streaming services don't. Streaming services have no ads, so you get your half hour or your hour and you get to organically figure out where the breaks are.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
And Sandy, you had a follow-up to what we were talking about before. Oh, you're muted.
There we go. I just wondered what it was that made a limited series more difficult than episodic.
Well, money. When you do episodic, and you get enough episodes that it can then be syndicated, people are very happy about that. Limited series is pretty much only connected to those 6-8 weeks, however many you do. I mean, so they're trickier, but you do something, you do the OJ trial, you do, was it Fosse Verdon? These sort of big name things, people are interested, and it's all about viewership at that point. And they're not cheap to make.
And so they're probably not going to go with a new writer or anything for something like that, I would imagine.
That would be challenging.
Yeah. Okay.
That would be challenging. Unless, the only way I can see that happening is if all 6 are written and it's so spectacular that people are like, oh my God, we have to do that.
Right. Trish, you were asking about what percentage of your pitches get picked up? I mean, it's like, what's your batting average? Are we going to be okay with it's not, nobody bats 1,000, obviously, but what's the kind of, what do the pros kind of even experience?
Batting average, that's tricky. I'd say 40-60.
That's great.
40% of the time we've gotten a positive response, but in terms of going from there to getting it on the air, somebody once said the chances, there used to be before streaming, that the chances of going on the air are about as likely as getting struck by lightning on a golf course. Because there are more outlets now, there's more need for material. But it's harder to go from the pitch to actually getting it made. And I would think with each of you, it would be important to partner with a producer, because you are new to this. You'd have to have someone running your show who has experience.
Right. And before you go into a pitch, you should have already decided, you know, it's serial. You make the decision when you pitch it. If this, I see this as a serialization. Do you
Well,
say
the show will dictate what it is. You know, everything you do, whether it's serialized or episodic, has to have, every episode has to have the feeling of a beginning, a middle, and an end. But if there are ongoing stories, and your show will tell you that.
Mhm.
You know, is it a family drama? Then there have to be ongoing stories.
Right.
You know, like 6 Feet Under did both. I mean, they were primarily serialized, but there was the death of the week.
Right. Good point. Deborah, you had a question. Deborah Byrne.
Yeah. TV green for sure. And despite, as I said at the beginning, being in media, your world is a mystery. Ever since the Hollywood Reporter recommended my IP be a movie or a series, I've been agented. I have an agent, but they seem much more reactive than proactive, and my CIO background has a much different approach. So I'd love to hear your definition of the role of a great agent and how important they are to this process and talking to production companies and so on.
Let me start by saying I have had the same agent since 1986. She's one of my dear friends. She is the opposite of reactive. She's incredibly proactive. They send us books 3 times a week, scripts 3 times a week for us to read. You know, constantly trying to get things moving forward. If the agents you're working with are reactive as opposed to proactive, the first thing I would do is say, what's the plan? What's the plan with this book? How do we get it out there? And if they don't respond, you need to find a new agent. Do you have a literary agent?
The agent is, I'm trying not to mention their name because I don't want to color your perspective, but when the recommendation from the Hollywood Reporter came in, this is my publisher's agent that they just assigned to me with my approval because they had an agency attached to their publishing company. And in order to appear in the Hollywood Reporter, because it was rights available, you had to have an agent to be contacted. So it was very quick. And it wasn't a traditional literary agent thing. We were past that. And now it was through
It also doesn't sound like it's a writer's agent to be able to go out there and try to find companies or writers or whatever to.
Right. And they're not on the ground in LA, which is one of the feelings that I have. I don't think they're having the meetings even on Zoom. They are here in New York and they feel disconnected from actual results. So I don't want to, because I may be in a unique situation, I don't want to maximize, I don't want to go over on time, but I just wanted to know how important they were to the mix, because it sounds like you can approach a production company without an agent.
Yeah.
You have the book. After this workshop, I know I'll have a pitch. So, you know, it might be time for a different approach. So thank you for that input.
Okay, and Laura, Zam, you had a question.
Yeah, I was curious about one idea I have in my head is it's like an update of a previous show, transparently so though. And I'm wondering if that's the way that Girls is kind of like a comment on Sex and the City. And I'm wondering if that's frowned upon, or if that is, I don't know, helpful in some way for people to orient and to see, oh, okay, they want to work with sort of like a general concept, but, you know, update it or address certain things in a different way, like give it a slant.
I think that's tricky. And I would doubt that in the girls' pitch, they said it's an updated Sex in the City. I would highly doubt they did that, because you want to feel, you know, something unique. You can, in somewhere in the pitch, say it's like an updated Sex in the City, but I wouldn't use that as any sort of important element of your pitch.
And Leslie, you had a question kind of, I think, related to what you lead with or what you emphasize.
Right. I was wondering, how would you pitch This Is Us in terms of leading with, it's a family drama, comedy with comedy beats, or the structure of back and forth in time, or both, or neither?
I guess if I were to have pitched that, I would have pitched the family drama first, and then the back and forth is in time is the twist on it. It's what makes it different.
Great, thank you.
And Trish, well, and this is a question I have too, but Trish Cook was asking about, are there outlets who are specifically open to older characters, or, you know, women in our age group? And that's what one of the bigger questions I have, and one of the things that have led me to want Next Tribe to do this is, I just wonder if this is a, you know, women like us have great stories. We've lived, we've loved, we've, you know, failed and triumphed. And I just wanted to see, is this a good time for women like us to get our stories told?
Yes, I think it's a very good time to get our stories told. You know, partly because there are so many places to go who are reaching so many audiences. I mean, they told us that we couldn't, you know, one of the hesitations about Friends from the network is that there were no older characters. And they said, people aren't going to watch a bunch of young people. And we said, yes, they will. If you can identify with the stories. People were worried about Grace and Frankie being about, you know, those four older characters. And we said the same thing. If the characters are identifiable, then people will watch. And I think no matter what the age is, this is the time to tell those stories. You know, and I think, you know, one of the things right now, people are looking for new voices we haven't given enough attention to, stories about people we haven't given enough attention to. You know, so it's a good time. It's a good time. I mean, you know, besides Grace and Frankie and Golden Girls, there weren't a lot of shows about women of a certain age, and people watched. I mean, the proof is in the pudding. People watched. And I think they would do the same for other shows about women of a certain age. And some networks are better for it than others. You know, if they're not pretty, Lifetime doesn't want to do it.
And that was part of your question, Trish. Like, are there some outlets that are more open to women of older women?
You know, I think the streaming services are probably more open to it than the networks.
Okay.
But there are so many streaming services.
Right.
Yeah.
I would have thought Lifetime would have been a good one for older women, but I guess not.
Well, you know, they're funny about that. they're willing to tell the story as long as it's a little salacious.
Hmm.
Right.
And everybody has to be beautiful, which I personally resent enormously.
I understand. And Tricia Stearns wanted to know if there are any suggestions of more specifically on outlets or that might be open to these stories.
Stories about women.
Yeah.
Certainly Netflix. Amazon is being run by a woman. So I'm guessing that they may be more open to women's stories, though a lot of their stories are macho, not even in that it's about macho men, but the stories have that kind of
Right.
machismo. Let's see, Freeform, like stories about women. And I don't know so much about the networks. I'm not as in touch with what the networks are looking for.
And what about you? What are you in your, what do you look for now? What are you open to right now?
Our company is looking to do things set in places about people that we haven't seen before. That in some way is unique. We're looking for stories that humanize, you know, what many people call the other. You know, we're talking about doing a story about sexuality and a woman in a wheelchair. So we're looking for, and all of it has to have heart. I mean, I could never do Veep. I could never do it. That is, you know, it's certainly funny, but everybody was so mean, and I can't do that show.
So that's helpful. And I think Deborah asked, is the pandemic, has it affected what people are looking for? What's, you know, content need, production? I mean,
pandemic has changed everything. You know, some people are diving right into set the story in the pandemic. Some people are not. Productions will change enormously. Where we could shoot 6 pages a day pre-pandemic, we'll be lucky if we can get 4 pages a day because of all the protocols. So everything will be slower. But then we also have the issue, how many actors do we want to have on the set? Can there be extras? How do we shoot that? And sometimes you have to shoot a plate of an empty space. You know, you're looking over the character to an empty space, and then we have to digitally put in the extras. Right. If it's 2 characters, you know, if it's an actor who's coming on the set for 1 day, we have to find a way to keep them separate. So, you know, I'd say this is not the time to do crowd scenes.
And when you're thinking of this, when you're making your pitch, are you thinking, you be thinking of how much it might cost?
No.
Okay.
No, and any good producer you work with will say, you know what, this is a great idea, but do we have to have 4 explosions? Mm-hmm. What I would say for you, write the best pilot you can and let someone else figure that out.
Okay. And Jennifer, you had a question about first-time writer.
Yeah, I just wanted to go back to kind of the process and ask, how willing are companies now, how willing are they to work with first-time writers? And you had mentioned going in with a seasoned producer. I was wondering if that's sort of the key. And then the follow-up to that is, should you have more than one pitch ready when you're pitching someone?
Say the first one again, because I got caught up in the second one.
Okay. Yeah. How willing are people to work with first-time writers, and should they always be working with a seasoned producer on their first pitch?
In terms of how willing people are, that's company by company. The younger, hungrier companies, I think, are more open. Companies that have someone who could be in a, I mean, whoever it is, they'll probably pair you up with a showrunner who will have input on, you know, whatever it is you're writing. So companies that have access to showrunners, but, you know, the first thing, I think the most important thing for those of you who haven't done this before is to get people to know your work. There's a good chance the first thing you pitch will not be made, but it might get people interested in you and your voice. So sending it out. Now you may have, I know our company did this when we get cold samples. We always ask people to sign something, because what if you send something that we're already working on? Something like it. We don't want you to think we stole an idea from you. So we always have people sign something before we get. A lot of places do that.
And what is it? What will that say? That thing you sign, what will it say?
It'll say that basically, you're not going to sue us.
Mm. And that relates to
that is one of the hesitation
Right.
that people have in getting cold samples. I mean, I have gotten spec scripts, like Friends spec scripts when we were doing Friends, that had ideas that we were working on.
Right.
Mhm.
So that,
And then,
oh, go ahead, sorry.
I was going to say, and then the second part of that question was, you know, it kind of flows into what you just said. Do you need more than one developed pitch when you're going in?
Not necessarily. Not necessarily. I would say focus on the one, see what you can do, learn from it, and then do the next one.
And Gail and several other people have asked this, and I know that this is also comes up with magazine stories. You know, you send a story in, and how do you know they're not going to steal it? And I guess that's the flip side of what you just talked about, you know, about taking something cold and worried that they're going to sue you. And then I guess, how do you protect yourself? And is this a real problem?
You know, I've heard both sides of this story. One way to protect yourself is to, what it used to be, and I'd have to look into this, or you'd have to ask the Writers Guild. It used to be that you could send a registered copy to yourself.
Right.
So it is dated. So if you send something in and you go, hey, wait, you're doing an idea, you can look up the dates and say, no, we started working on these. You can see our notes from 3 months before we got that. Or you can't find any paper trail, and then maybe there's a suit there. Both have happened. I know people who were convinced that their stuff was stolen. but it was just they already had the idea.
Yes, there is such a thing as synchronicity, where people have
Yeah.
ideas, and I've dealt with that in the magazine world, and it's unfortunate because I think some people really believe that it was stolen, but I don't, in the magazine world, I don't believe it happens all that as much as it might seem to happen. So I guess that's let's see, we have a few more questions. Blah, 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 blah. Who else is wanting to ask a question? Raise your hand. Jo Beth, you had some questions.
Wait, there's a question here I just saw. Is there a place we can read successful TV pitches and pilot scripts?
Yes.
I'm sure there are. And what I can do is look into that between now and next week and maybe send you a few.
That would be great. That would be so helpful. Because I imagine that 12 are going to be writing some stuff up over the coming week. Deborah, you had something else?
Yeah, I do know that the pilot scripts are definitely out there. You can go and put in pilot script of Mad Men and it comes up and you can print it out and read it. I think the interesting part of that question are the actual pitches themselves. Like that seems to be proprietary information that's not generally available, and since we will have our 5 minutes,
I don't know why it would be prior.
I don't know. I haven't come across one yet.
There's a way to do it, and if worse comes to worse, I can send you a couple of ours.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's very interesting to read the pitch and then.
Yeah, that would be amazing.
Yeah, a friend of mine sent me 3 under penalty of death if I share them. So pitches of TV series pitches, and they're all completely different. So I just kind of wanted to see.
But those, those pitches are things that aren't out there yet. You should be able to have access to pitches of shows that have already been on the air.
Interesting. Laura, you had another question about IP.
Yeah, if somebody has IP, like I have a memoir and I'd be interested in seeing how, if there's interest. You had mentioned that if you have IP that you could write a short pitch to go alongside that. And so it's just 2 short questions. One is, would that pitch just be a shorter version of following the format or the elements you just said, or how long should that written pitch be? And then the second is the best process just to go through one's literary agent and have them connect to whatever TV agents might be, part of that agency, right, or affiliated?
Here's what I would say. People are going to be more willing to read the pitch than they are the book at first. So, the question that you'll want to ask of your literary agent is, let's find a TV agent and see if people are interested in this log line, this arena. Would you be interested in hearing a pitch or reading the book? And here's all the stuff about the book and all the, great acclaim it gets. And, I think that's important. And I think in that case, the book is in some ways secondary, because if the log line doesn't affect people, they're not going to read the book.
Right. And explain what you mean by log line. I'm just sorry, but just.
The log line is that short, what's at the heart of the show.
Okay.
Sometimes 2 sentences long.
Okay. And a couple of things that and I know Jennifer's asking, so what happens after you make a pitch? Jennifer asked that, but I think all of us are, what if they like it, what might we expect to happen?
Well, the first thing that happens is you get into your car and you scream. That's the first thing that happens. Generally, what happens is they make a deal. And after they make a deal, the first step is coming up with the basic pilot story. making sure that the arena is where the network or streaming service would like it to be. Then you write an outline. And very often all of this stuff will go through, you'll get feedback from the producers first. So there are quite a few steps. So then you do an outline, you hand in an outline to the studio or the network or whoever got excited about it. And after the network approves the outline, you write the first draft of the script. If you're with a studio, you will do a second draft with the studio. It then goes to the network and they will give notes and you'll do another draft.
And should you expect to still be involved? I mean, would there be occasions where they're just going to buy your idea?
No.
Okay.
No, if it's your idea, you are attached to it in some way.
Okay.
It may not be as showrunner, and if it's an idea they like but want to attach another writer, you're still connected to it and still get credit.
And this is completely, this is really another workshop, but I'm sure there are things, if they make a deal with you, that you need an agent or an attorney or somebody to help you, because don't just sign the first thing that they say, right?
You need a lawyer.
Yeah, okay.
You need a lawyer. You need an entertainment lawyer. There are plenty of them out there. They're not like agents. They're not as hard to get. But you absolutely must have an entertainment attorney look over the paperwork if you don't, especially if there's no agent.
Okay. And Beth, you had another question?
Oh, it was simple. Just how important is the title? You know, like I've got 7 different titles for mine, and
oh, I hate doing titles. They're so hard. The title's important. Title's important. It's what people grab onto.
And
you know, the title itself becomes iconic. So short titles are better than really long ones that help identify what the show is about. Orange is the New Black is a great title. 6 Feet Under was a great title. Chicago PD is fine. The Wire was a good title. I mean, there's so many interesting ways to metaphorically describe your show.
Mm-hmm. And can you just tell us how you came, was Friends always the name of your, what was it called originally?
We must have gone through 4 or 5 titles. We had Friends Like Us, The 6 of Us, Insomnia Cafe, Across the Hall, and the network is the one that said, will you shorten it to Friends?
And when the network asked, you're like, okay.
Well, we said if you pick it up, we'll call it Kevorkian. We don't care.
We're getting close to time, but I think it was Trish Cook who suggested, I think you said you had an incubator for young women of color. Is that right?
Or women of color, not young.
Okay, women of color. Or Trish, just ask your question the way you put it in the.
I just said, would you be willing to consider to have an incubator for green TV writers? Just throwing it out there. I'm inspired by everybody.
We do think about it. We do think about it. I do want to be specific in who those voices are. You know, it's so much about finding new voices, and truthfully, it's something I would do. I just can't right now because I have so many things on my plate. But it is something I would consider, and you know, look, I'll say this here, and I'll deny ever saying it if anybody asks. But you can stay in touch with me.
Thank you.
And
I want to also just take a few minutes before we end I would love to just take a few minutes and talk about what we're going to need next week.
Okay. Perfect.
Okay. So I assume everybody has some idea that they're working on, right? Then what I need you to do is find what's at the heart of the show, do your log line, tell me a little bit about the characters, do the why me, why now. It doesn't have to be in this order. I'm just telling you what needs to be included. And a sense of what the series would look like. Not just that one episode, but what's the series gonna look like? And hopefully it'll last 5 minutes or less. Once you write it, familiarize yourself with it.
Because you're going to be speaking it. And
that's right.
And you're going to want to put energy and into it. So you're not reading it.
Right. Well, I mean, you have to, you're not going to memorize it.
Right.
But I don't want it like this.
Yeah.
You have to know it enough that you can just follow along with your finger and just look down.
And for the 12 of you who are going to be pitching next week, this is your chance to get anything that you're not clear on. Did everyone get a chance to ask your questions? Do you feel complete at this point? Good. Well, it's going to be great to hear from all of you and hear ideas. And those of you who are observing, I'm so glad you're here, and I hope you've learned. I've learned so much. But it'll be a great opportunity. It's not going to be Shark Tank, but it's got that same, it's not, you're not Sharky, are you? But it's going to be a great opportunity to see how the process goes. So I think it's going to be fun, and it's going to be in a very supportive environment. We're all supportive of each other here, because we all are, or a lot of us, in the same kind of boat of like not quite sure how it all works, but we have stories, and that's what's important. For me, with Next Tribe, we want your stories to get out. I think that helps. It helps in the sense of how other women see themselves and what they think is possible when they see stories from women like Grace and Frankie. Inspires us. And actually, sometimes if you watch, and I'm sure you've done this when you're watching Grace and Frankie thinking, oh my God, she's been inside my head, because the same things have happened to you. So that's what's so beautiful about stories, about when we tell our own stories. And so wait, Colette just had, can you give an example of a log line? And so like that would be I think that would be like what you said for Friends, right? Was that?
It's about, 6 people in their 20s who live in New York and looking for love and career. And it's about that time in your life when your friends are your family.
So that's an example of a log line.
That's not exactly word for word, but it's pretty close.
Yeah. And so other than that, and the 12 of you, I'm going to write you with, if it's okay, Marta, I will give, we can talk about what we can share of your contact info. And I'll also, if Marta sends me some pitches, I'll get those out and to you. But otherwise, we're going to see you at the same time, same place. Get your bat phone on, whatever. But we'll see you at the same time next week, and we're really looking forward to it. Thank you, Marta.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Everyone. Thank you. Wonderful. Thank you, Jeannie.
Okay, and thanks to everyone who came. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.